They called her the Turtle. They mocked the grinding sound of her iron leg brace. To the arrogant chief of trauma and the gossip-hungry nurses of Metro Grace, Seraphina Cross was a burden, just a broken woman moving too slow in a fast world. They mistook her limp for weakness. They mistook her silence for submission. But they were wrong, dead wrong. When the blizzard cut the power and a dying commander was wheeled in, the staff froze. But Seraphina didn't. And when two armored tanks crushed the doctor's Mercedes to get to the front door, not for a patient, but for her, the staff realized too late that they hadn't been ordering around a cripple. They had been disrespecting a Valkyrie. The wind howled off the Detroit River, carrying with it a biting chill that seemed to ignore the existence of glass and concrete. It was a historic blizzard, the kind the Weather Channel's named, burying the city of Detroit under 2 feet of gray slush and white powder. Inside Metro Grace Hospital, the heating system hummed and rattled, fighting a losing battle against the sub-zero temperatures pressing against the windows. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile, pale glow on the tired faces of the night shift staff. Seraphina Finn Cross moved down the hallway of the emergency department. She was 35, though the deep grooves of exhaustion around her eyes made her look older. Her scrubs were a size too large, effectively hiding the shape of her body, but they could not hide the rhythm of her movement. Click, drag, step, click, drag, step. Every motion was a labor. Hidden beneath the loose green fabric of her left pant leg was a heavy custom-welded iron brace. It was an ugly functional cage of metal and leather straps that held her shattered femur and crushed tibia together. To the rest of the staff, it was just a noise, a rhythmic metallic grinding that announced her arrival long before she appeared. To Finn, it was a torture device that she had learned to call a friend. "Move it, Turtle!" The voice came from the nurse's station. It was Kylie, a younger nurse with perfectly applied eyeliner and a cruel streak that she mistook for a personality. Kylie was leaning against the counter, twirling a pen, watching Finn navigate the linoleum floor. Finn didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the tray of medications in her hands. "Coming through, Kylie," she said, her voice a low, raspy alto that rarely rose above a whisper. "Seriously, watching you walk makes my legs tired," Kylie snorted, turning back to her phone. Finn reached the supply cart. In the blink of an eye, the sluggishness vanished. Her hands, rough and scarred, moved with the blur of a magician performing a sleight of hand. She sorted the saline flushes, arranged the gauze, and prepped 3 IV kits in the time it took Kylie to scroll past 2 videos. This was the paradox of Seraphina Cross. From the waist down, she was a ruin. From the waist up, she was a machine. She ignored the ache that radiated from her hip bone down to her ankle. The cold weather made the metal in her leg freeze, turning the brace into a conductor of pain. It felt as though someone were slowly tightening a vise around her thigh. She breathed through it, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Pain is information, she told herself. It means the nerves are still alive. She finished restocking the cart and pushed it toward the waiting area. The ER was overflowing. The storm had caused dozens of fender benders and slip and fall accidents. The air smelled of wet wool, antiseptic, and old coffee. In the far corner of the waiting room, tucked away from the prying eyes of the security guards, sat Artie. Artie was a fixture of the city. He was a homeless Vietnam veteran, a man composed of layers of mismatched coats, a gray beard stained with tobacco, and eyes that had seen too much jungle and not enough kindness. He was shivering, his knobby hands clutching his knees. Finn checked to make sure Kylie and the charge nurse weren't looking. She slipped a thermos from her cart and walked over to him. Click, drag, step. Artie looked up as she approached. He didn't see the limp. He looked straight at her face. "Black, 2 sugars," Finn whispered, pressing the warm thermos into his trembling hands. "And a protein bar in the pocket. Eat it slowly, Artie." The old man took the coffee, letting the heat seep into his palms. He took a long, shuddering sip and sighed. Then, his gaze dropped to her leg, then back up to her posture. Finn was standing with her weight shifted to her good leg, her back straight, her head on a swivel, scanning the room even as she spoke to him. "You're guarding the perimeter again, girl," Artie rasped, his voice like gravel grinding together. Finn froze for a fraction of a second. I'm just checking for the charge nurse, Artie. Drink your coffee. No, Artie shook his head slowly. I know a cripple when I see one. I got shrapnel in my knee from 68. I walk like a crab. He pointed a gnarled finger at her. You walk slow, but you stand like you're waiting for a breach. Parade rest, shoulders squared. You ain't broken, girl. You're just parked. The storm is making you talk crazy, old man, Finn said softly, though a chill that had nothing to do with the blizzard went down her spine. Keep your head down. I'll check on you in an hour. She turned away, the metal in her leg clicking softly as she retreated. Just a parked vehicle, she thought. If only he knew the engine was dead. Suddenly, the double doors of the ambulance bay burst open. A gust of freezing wind swept through the ER, followed by paramedics wheeling in a gurney. Trauma 1! A voice roared from down the hall. It was Dr. Julian Vane. Dr. Vane was the chief of trauma surgery. He was a man carved from marble and ego, tall, with impeccable dark hair that never seemed to move, and a jawline that could cut glass. Vane was a brilliant surgeon who believed kindness was a waste of time. He moved with the grace of a predator, his white coat spotless, his eyes cold and calculating. He demanded perfection because he believed he was the embodiment of it. I need the vitals on the abdominal obstruction in Bay 4, and I need them yesterday, Vane shouted, not looking at anyone in particular, expecting the universe to align with his needs. Chart is coming, doctor, Kylie yelled from the station, then nudged Finn. Go, run, Turtle. Don't make him wait. Finn grabbed the heavy metal clipboard. She knew Vane was in a foul mood. The storm meant low staff and high stress. She clamped her jaw shut and pushed off the wall. Click, drag, step. She tried to hurry. She threw her weight forward, swinging the heavy iron leg with as much momentum as she could muster. Sweat pricked at her hairline. The hallway seemed to stretch out like a mile-long tunnel. Click-clack, click-clack. The sound echoed off the pristine white walls. It was uneven, jarring, a mechanical syncopation that disrupted the chaotic symphony of the ER. Dr. Vane stood at the entrance of Trauma Bay 4, his hand extended, waiting for the chart. He tapped his foot. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Finn was 10 feet away. She was breathing hard, her face pale from the exertion. Here, doctor, she gasped, extending the clipboard as she closed the distance. Vane didn't take it. He let his hand drop. He turned slowly, his blue eyes locking onto her with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. The ER went silent. The nurses stopped typing. The paramedics paused in the doorway. Even the patient seemed to sense the drop in atmospheric pressure. Do you hear that? Vane asked, his voice dangerously calm. Finn stood frozen, the clipboard hovering in the air. Doctor? That noise, Vane said, pointing a manicured finger at her leg. Click, clack, click, clack. I can't help it, sir. It's the brace. It sounds like a clock. Vane stepped closer, invading her personal space. He towered over her. It sounds like a countdown. Do you have any idea what that sounds like to a patient who thinks they are dying, Ms. Cross? It sounds like the Reaper knocking on the door. Finn lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, doctor. I was moving as fast as I could. Fast? Vane let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. You are a liability. You are an obstruction in my hallway. I asked for this chart 30 seconds ago. In my operating room, 30 seconds is the difference between a pulse and a corpse. He snatched the clipboard from her hand with enough force to make her stumble. She caught herself on the wall, the iron brace screeching against the floor. Look at you, Vane sneered, gesturing to her struggling form. You're pathetic. You drag that leg around like a ball and chain, and you drag this entire department down with you. Why are you even here? You can't run. You can't lift. You can barely walk. Finn swallowed the lump of bile in her throat. She gripped the fabric of her scrub pants, her knuckles turning white. She could have told him. She could have told him that she could field strip a wound in the dark while under mortar fire. She could have told him that the ball and chain was the price she paid for carrying a 200-pound man 3 miles through a mountain pass. But Seraphina Cross said nothing. She was a ghost, and ghosts didn't speak. I am a nurse, doctor, she whispered. I do my job. Then do it somewhere else, Vane hissed, turning his back on her to open the chart. Get out of my sight, Cross. If I hear that clicking sound again tonight, I will have security throw you out into the snow where you belong. You're scaring the patients. Finn stood there for a heartbeat, the humiliation burning her cheeks like frostbite. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room, Kylie's smirk, the pity of the receptionist, the confusion of the patients. She turned around slowly. Click, drag, step. She walked away, head bowed, the sound of her broken body echoing in the silence Dr. Vane had created. She retreated toward the supply closet, the only place where she could breathe, unaware that outside, through the swirling whiteout of the blizzard, the past was already rolling toward her on tank treads. The darkness didn't fall, it slammed into the building. One moment, the emergency room was a hive of white light and frantic motion. The next, it was a cavern of shadows. The blizzard outside had finally claimed a transformer, severing the hospital's connection to the city grid. For 3 heart-stopping seconds, there was absolute blackness, filled only by the collective gasp of 50 people and the sudden, terrifying silence of the ventilation system. Then, the backup generators kicked in with a guttural roar that vibrated through the floorboards. The lights flickered back on, but they were different now, dimmer, casting a sickly, jaundiced hue over the trauma bays. The red emergency light spun silently in the corners, painting the walls in washing pulses of crimson. Power fluctuation confirmed, a voice announced over the intercom, sounding tinny and distant. Essential systems only, conservation protocols in effect. The drop in voltage seemed to spike the tension in the room. In Trauma Bay 2, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "He's not moving air!" a woman screamed. "Somebody help him!" Seraphina Finn Cross was already moving. She pushed her cart toward Bay 2, the iron brace on her leg clicking a frantic rhythm against the linoleum. Inside the bay, a 6-year-old boy named Leo was fighting for every breath. He was small for his age, his ribs retracting deeply with every desperate attempt to inhale, his skin turning a terrifying shade of gray-blue. His mother, Mrs. Gable, a young woman with tear-streaked cheeks and wet snow still clinging to her coat, was clutching his hand, her knuckles white. Dr. Julian Vane swept into the room, his white coat flapping like a cape. He looked exhausted. The circles under his eyes were darker in the emergency lighting, and his usual composure was fraying at the edges. The storm had flooded his ER with trauma, and his patients had evaporated hours ago. "Status," Vane barked, not looking at the mother. "Severe status asthmaticus," Kylie, the nurse from the previous shift, reported, her voice rising in panic. "O2 sats are dropping, 82%. We've tried albuterol and ipratropium, no air entry." Vane grabbed his stethoscope, jamming the earpieces into his ears. He listened to the boy's chest for less than 2 seconds. "Tight as a drum. He's clamping down." Vane straightened up, tossing the stethoscope onto the bed. "We need to break the bronchospasm now. Get me epinephrine, IV push." Finn, who was standing by the crash cart preparing the airway equipment, froze. "Doctor," she said, her voice low but clear. "He's a pediatric patient, approximately 40 pounds. Vane ignored her. He was already looking at the monitor, watching the heart rate climb. "Give him 0.5 milligrams, 1 to 1,000 concentration, now." Finn stepped forward, placing her hand over the medication drawer. "Dr. Vane, 0.5 is an adult dose. For a child his size, the protocol is 0.01 per kilogram. That's too much adrenaline. You'll stop his heart." The room went deadly quiet. Kylie stopped reaching for the vial. The mother looked from the doctor to the nurse, eyes wide with terror. Vane turned slowly to face Finn. The red emergency light washed over his face, making his anger look demonic. He was the chief of trauma. He was a god in this building, and he was being corrected by the turtle in front of a patient's family. "Are you the attending physician, Ms. Cross?" Vane asked, his voice dangerously soft. "No, sir, but nothing," Vane snapped. "The child is hypoxic. He is dying. I am treating the physiological crisis with aggressive therapy. Do not presume to lecture me on dosage while you can barely walk across the room without sounding like a bag of bolts." He turned to Kylie. "Draw it up. 0.5. Give it." "But doctor," Kylie hesitated, looking at Finn. "Do it, or get out," Vane roared. Kylie scrambled to obey, her hands shaking as she cracked the ampule. Vane turned back to Finn, his eyes narrowing. "Since you have so much energy to debate my orders, you can make yourself useful. The central oxygen supply pressure is fluctuating because of the power outage. We need E-cylinders in Bay 1, 3, and 5. The transport techs are stuck in the elevator." "I'll get the cart," Finn said, turning to go. "No," Vane blocked her path. "The carts are in use for the mass casualty intake in the lobby. You carry them." Finn stared at him. An E-cylinder oxygen tank was made of solid steel. It weighed roughly 15 to 20 pounds. Carrying one was difficult for an able-bodied person. For someone whose femur was held together by screws and whose balance relied on a precarious distribution of weight, it was a physical impossibility without excruciating pain. "Doctor," Finn whispered, "my leg—" "Your leg is not my problem," Vane sneered, leaning in close. "You wanted to be part of this team? Then pull your weight, move the tanks cross, one by one, or clock out and don't come back." Finn looked at Leo, who was gasping for air. She looked at Kylie, who was preparing the injection. She had to stay. If she left, there would be no one to watch the boy. "Yes, doctor," she said. She walked to the storage closet. She grit her teeth so hard she felt a molar crack. She grabbed the first green steel cylinder. She hoisted it up, cradling it against her chest. The weight hit her broken hip like a sledgehammer. Click, drag, crunch. The sound was different now. The leather straps of her brace dug into her soft tissue, cutting off circulation. The screws in her bone felt like they were twisting, tearing through the marrow. Every step was a white-hot explosion of agony. Sweat poured down her back, soaking her scrubs instantly. She made it to Bay 1. She dropped the tank. She wheezed, wiping her eyes. She had to go back. Click, drag, crunch. By the time she returned to Trauma Bay 2 with the second tank, the scene had shifted from urgent to catastrophic. "Heart rate is 220, Kylie screamed. "BP is 180 over 110. He's seizing." Leo was arching off the bed. The overdose of epinephrine had hit his small system like a lightning bolt. His heart was hammering so fast it wasn't pumping blood effectively. It was just vibrating. The monitor screamed a high-pitched alarm. "VTOSH." Dr. Vane was at the head of the bed, looking stunned. "Bag him! Why is he crashing?" "It's the epi!" Finn dropped the oxygen tank. It hit the floor with a deafening clang that cracked the tile, but she didn't care. The pain in her leg vanished, replaced by the cold, razor-sharp focus of the combat medic. She didn't limp. She launched herself. Finn shoved Kylie aside with a strength that belied her slender frame. "Move!" "What are you doing?" Vane shouted. "Get away from him!" "He's in hypertensive crisis and tachycardia," Finn yelled, her voice dropping into the command tone she hadn't used since the sandbox. "He's going to stroke out. Get me labetalol, now!" "I didn't order that." Vane reached for her arm. Finn spun on him, her blue eyes blazing with a ferocity that made the surgeon recoil. "If you touch me, he dies. Step back." She ripped open the crash cart. Her hands were a blur. She found the vial. She didn't wait for a calculation. She knew the dosage by heart. It was muscle memory, burned into her brain by 1,000 field traumas. Draw, tap, push. She injected the beta blocker into the boy's IV line. "Time!" she barked at the room. "Mark it, 02:14 a.m. She turned to the monitor. Beep, 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 beep. The line was jagged, chaotic. "Come on, Leo," she whispered, placing a hand on the boy's small chest. "Slow down. Easy now." Vane stood paralyzed, his mouth slightly open. He was watching a nurse hijack his code. He should be calling security. He should be tackling her, but he couldn't move. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythm slowed. The jagged spikes smoothed out. The heart rate dropped. 180, 150, 120. Leo's back relaxed. He slumped onto the mattress. His breathing was shallow, but the terrifying arching seizure had stopped. The oxygen saturation monitor began to tick up. 85%, 88%, 90%. The room exhaled. Mrs. Gable sobbed, collapsing onto her knees beside the bed. Finn stepped back, her hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. The pain in her leg came rushing back, a tidal wave of agony that nearly buckled her knees. She grabbed the edge of the crash cart to hold herself upright. Dr. Vane blinked. The shock on his face was replaced instantly by a cold, hard mask of defensive fury. He checked the monitor, confirmed the boy was stable, and then turned slowly to Finn. He didn't say, "Good job." He didn't say, "Thank you." He walked over to the counter, ripped a disciplinary form from a pad, and began to write. The scratching of his pen was the only sound in the room besides the mother's weeping. He ripped the yellow sheet off and held it out to Finn. "Insubordination," Vane said, his voice flat. "Practicing medicine without a license. Unauthorized administration of a Class C medication." Finn stared at the paper. "I saved his life." "You got lucky," Vane hissed, shoving the paper into the pocket of her scrub top. "You undermine my authority in a critical situation. You endangered this patient with your cowboy antics. I am filing a formal report with the nursing board in the morning. Consider your license suspended pending investigation." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the mother couldn't hear. "And if you ever countermand me again, Cross, I won't just fire you. I will make sure you never work in anything cleaner than a gas station bathroom for the rest of your life. Now get that oxygen tank to Bay 3. You're not done yet?" Vane turned and walked out, his white coat billowing, leaving Finn standing in the dim red light. Finn looked down at her leg. The brace had torn through the skin. She could feel the warm trickle of blood running down her shin. She looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully now. She took a breath. She adjusted her grip on the cart. Click, drag, step. She picked up the next heavy steel tank. She had a job to do. The red trauma phone at the central nursing station did not ring often. When it did, it possessed a shrill, mechanical scream that was designed to cut through the din of chaos, a sound that triggered a primal fight-or-flight response in everyone who heard it. At 02:45 a.m., amidst the groaning of the backup generators and the howling of the blizzard outside, the red phone screamed. Seraphina, Finn Cross, was in the middle of dragging the third oxygen tank toward Bay 5. The sound made her flinch, a micro-tremor that sent a fresh spike of agony up her shattered leg. She stopped, leaning heavily against the steel cylinder, watching as the charge nurse, a formidable woman named Margaret with graying hair and a permanent scowl, snatched the receiver. The emergency room fell silent. Even the moaning patient seemed to sense the shift in the air. Margaret's face, usually the color of granite, went pale. She scribbled furiously on a notepad, her hand shaking. She slammed the phone down and looked up, her voice trembling but loud enough to reach the back corners of the department. "Code Black, mass casualty incident, ETA 3 minutes. Dr. Julian Vane emerged from his office, his white coat pristine, despite the earlier chaos. He looked annoyed rather than concerned. "What is it now, Margaret? A bus slid off the ice?" "No, doctor," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more terror than a scream. "It's a convoy. State police report a multi-vehicle ambush on the I-75 overpass. Black SUVs, no license plates, high-velocity ballistic trauma, and blast injuries." "Ambush?" Vane scoffed, adjusting his cuffs. "In Detroit? It's probably just a gang dispute that spilled onto the highway." "They said it's federal, doctor. Diplomatic transport." The word diplomatic changed the temperature in the room. Vane's posture straightened. Diplomatic meant VIPs. VIPs meant press. Press meant his face on the news. "Clear trauma?" "Bays 1 and 2, Vane barked, his fatigue replaced by a surge of ambitious energy. "Get the airway carts prepped. I want surgical trays open. Move people. We have important eyes on us tonight." Finn didn't move. She was looking toward the waiting room. The large wall-mounted television, powered by the emergency circuit, was flickering with breaking news. The sound was muted, but the images were screaming. She abandoned the oxygen tank and limped toward the glass partition. In the waiting room, Artie was standing directly in front of the screen. The homeless veteran was no longer shivering. He was vibrating with a tension that Finn recognized instantly. It was the vibration of a dog that smells a predator. Finn pushed through the double doors. "Artie?" The old man didn't look at her. He pointed a trembling, grime-stained finger at the screen. "Look." The news chopper was filming from a distance through the snow. The footage was grainy and dark, but the burning wreckage was unmistakable. A convoy of 3 heavy black SUVs had been decimated. One was overturned, engulfed in flames. Another was riddled with holes that were too big for standard bullets. But it was the third vehicle that caught Artie's eye. The door had been blown off, and for a split second, the camera zoomed in on the door panel before the feed cut away. There was a faint, matte black insignia painted on the armor, a hooded skull with a lightning bolt through the eye socket. Finn's heart stopped. She knew that symbol. She had sewn that patch onto uniforms in the back of a shaking C-130 transport plane. She had washed blood out of that symbol in a muddy river in Syria. Ghost Unit, Task Force 141. The unit that didn't exist. They found them, Artie whispered, turning to grab Finn's arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, his eyes wide and milky with cataracts but burning with clarity. The ghosts, they're bleeding, girl. I can smell it. Artie, you're seeing things, Finn said, her voice shaking. That's just a news report. No, Artie hissed, pulling her closer. I smell the cordite. I smell the burning diesel. They are bringing the war here. They are bringing him. Him? Finn asked, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. The Iron Man, Artie whispered. The one who walks through fire. Before Finn could ask what he meant, the sirens cut through the storm. These weren't the standard wailing sirens of the city ambulances. This was a low, guttural thrumming, a heavy bass note that rattled the windows in their frames. 2 armored SWAT trucks, repurposed for medical transport due to the weather, screeched into the ambulance bay, crushing the snowdrifts beneath massive run-flat tires. Incoming! A paramedic screamed as the bay doors flew open. The cold wind that rushed in felt like the breath of the grave. It brought the smell Artie had predicted, burnt rubber, copper blood, and the acrid tang of spent gunpowder. The first gurney rushed past Finn. On it lay a man in a shredded Italian suit. He was screaming, clutching a bloody towel to his shoulder. He was middle-aged, soft, with the manicured hands of a bureaucrat. My arm! They shot my arm! The man shrieked. Do you know who I am? I am Assistant Deputy Director Miller. Get me a doctor. Get me the best doctor you have. Dr. Vane was there instantly. He saw the expensive suit, the gold watch, and the title being shouted. Trauma 1, Vane commanded, taking charge of the gurney. Get him on the monitor. I want x-rays and a vascular consult immediately. Then the second gurney entered. The room fell silent. The man on the stretcher took up the entire width of the bed. He was massive, a mountain of muscle and scar tissue. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing tactical gear that had been cut away by the paramedics, revealing a torso that looked like it had been chewed by a wild animal. His chest was a map of violence. Purple bruising covered his ribs. There were multiple shrapnel wounds leaking dark venous blood. His left arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, but the most terrifying thing was his face. Beneath the blood and the grime, his jaw was set in a grimace of pure, silent defiance. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't making a sound. His eyes were closed, his breathing a wet, ragged rattle that bubbled from his chest. Silas, iron stone. Finn felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She recognized him instantly. Even under the ruin of trauma, she knew the shape of his shoulders, the thick scar running through his eyebrow. He was the reason she had a metal cage around her leg. He was the reason she was alive. Status! Vane yelled over his shoulder, already cutting the shirt off the screaming bureaucrat in Bay 1. A terrified paramedic, his uniform soaked in blood, stammered the report for the giant. Male, John Doe, approximately 40. Blast injury, multiple shrapnel wounds to the thorax and abdomen. BP is 60/40. He's crashing, Doc. We lost a pulse twice in the rig. Vane glanced at Silas. He saw the tactical tattoos. He saw the calloused hands. He saw the devastating extent of the injuries. In Vane's mind, the calculus was simple. The man in the suit was a VIP with a survivable arm injury. The giant was a bodyguard, a grunt, a piece of meat that had already served its purpose. And he was likely going to die regardless of intervention. He's expectant, Vane said coldly, turning back to the screaming politician. What? The paramedic blinked. Doc, he still has a rhythm. It's weak, but... I said expectant, Vane snapped. Look at him. He's flail chest, likely aortic dissection. He's a black tag. We don't have the resources to waste on a corpse while a dignitary is bleeding out. Vane waved a dismissive hand toward the hallway. Park him in the corridor. Give him morphine if he wakes up. Focus on the deputy director. You can't be serious, the paramedic argued. He's still fighting. This is my ER, and I decide who is worth saving, Vane roared, his ego flaring. Move him out of my trauma bay. Now, I need the space for the director's scans. Finn watched in horror as the order was obeyed. The orderlies, terrified of Vane, began to push Silas's gurney out of the warm, equipped trauma bay and into the drafty, dimly lit corridor near the waiting room. They parked him against the wall like a piece of broken furniture. They left him there, alone, with nothing but a thin hospital blanket to cover the devastation of his body. The injustice of it hit Finn harder than the physical pain of her leg. It was a physical blow. She watched Silas's chest rise and fall, a shallow, hitching movement. He was dying. The man who had once carried a wounded teammate 3 miles on a broken ankle was being discarded because he didn't wear a tie. No, Finn whispered. She looked at Vane, who was fawning over the bureaucrat, shouting orders for warm blankets and saline. She looked at Silas, abandoned in the shadows. She felt the metal brace on her leg tighten. She remembered the promise she had made 5 years ago, amidst the smoke and the screaming in a desert halfway across the world. Memento mori. Remember you must die, but not today. Not like this. Finn abandoned the oxygen cart. She didn't walk. She didn't click and drag. She moved with a singular, terrifying purpose toward the hallway. Dr. Vane didn't see her go. He didn't see the shift in her eyes. He thought he had cleared the room of debris. He didn't realize he had just woken up the only person in the building capable of saving the giant he had condemned to death. Finn reached the gurney. She looked down at Silas's face. I've got you, Stone, she whispered, her hand hovering over his bloody chest. I've got you. The corridor was a purgatory of shadows and cold drafts. While the main trauma bay exploded with the chaotic noise of saving the assistant deputy director, Silas Stone lay in the semi-darkness, his breathing a wet, hitching rhythm that sounded like a clock winding down. Seraphina Finn Cross stood over him. The adrenaline that had surged when she first saw him was now settling into a cold, crystalline focus. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly until it made contact with his skin. Then the tremor vanished. She grabbed a pair of trauma shears from her pocket and sliced through the remaining tatters of his tactical undershirt. The fabric fell away, revealing the full map of his ruin. His abdomen was distended, tight as a drum skin, and already mottling with deep purple bruising around the navel. Cullen's sign. He was bleeding internally, massive hemorrhage. But her eyes didn't linger on the bruising. They locked onto a scar running along the base of his neck, disappearing under his collarbone. It wasn't a surgical line. It was jagged, white, and forked, a lightning bolt. The memory hit her with the force of a physical blow. Syria. 5 years ago. A jagged piece of shrapnel from a mortar round. She had been knee-deep in mud, sewing that wound closed by the light of a tactical flare, while Silas held the retractor himself, refusing morphine so he could stay on comms. I patched you up once, old man, Finn whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't do it so you could die in a hallway in Michigan. She placed her hand on his stomach. It was rock hard. He wasn't just bleeding. His aorta had likely been nicked or crushed by the blunt force trauma. He didn't have 20 minutes. He didn't have 10. He had maybe 3. Finn looked up. The hallway was empty except for a young man standing near the linen cart, looking like he wanted to vomit. It was Elias, a first-year medical intern who had started only a week ago. Elias was thin, with messy hair and acne scars on his chin, wearing scrubs that looked 2 sizes too big for his frame. He was clutching a tablet to his chest like a shield, his eyes wide with terror behind thick-rimmed glasses. You, Finn said. Elias jumped. Me? Get over here, Finn commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order given with the same tone she used to command a fire team. Elias stumbled forward. Dr. Vane said to leave him. He said he's expectant. Dr. Vane is wrong, Finn said, her blue eyes locking onto the interns. Grab the foot of the bed. We are moving him to Trauma Bay 3. But Bay 3 is closed for cleaning, and Vane said, If you don't help me, Finn hissed, leaning in, This man dies in the next 180 seconds, and you will be the one who stood there and watched. Is that the doctor you want to be, Elias? The boy swallowed hard. He looked at the giant dying on the gurney, then at the fierce, crippled nurse. He nodded, a jerky, terrified motion. "Unlock the wheels," Finn ordered. She moved to the head of the bed. She ignored the screaming protest of her left leg. She planted her good foot and shoved. Click, drag, push. They rolled the heavy gurney down the hall, away from the prying eyes of the main ER. They swerved into Trauma Bay 3, a dark, quiet room that smelled of bleach. "Lock the door," Finn said as soon as they were inside. It doesn't lock," Elias stammered, frantically checking the handle. "It's a sliding glass door." "Then block it." Finn limped to the heavy crash cart in the corner. It weighed nearly as much as she did. She put her shoulder into it, gritting her teeth against the agony in her hip, and shoved it across the tiles. She jammed it wedged tight against the sliding door. It wasn't a fortress, but it would buy them time. She turned back to the patient. "Gloves, now." Elias fumbled with the box, snapping a pair of latex gloves on. What are we doing? We need a surgeon. We need to open him up." "No time," Finn said, stripping off her own jacket and rolling up her sleeves. "If we open him, he decompresses and bleeds out before we can clamp. We have to stop the flow from the outside." She looked at the gurney. It was too high. She couldn't get the leverage she needed from the floor. "Lower the bed," she ordered. Elias hit the pedal. The gurney hissed down. Finn took a breath. She grabbed the side rail. This was going to hurt. This was going to hurt more than anything she had felt in years. She pulled herself up, climbing onto the narrow mattress, straddling Silas's massive legs. Her iron brace ground against the metal rail, sending a shockwave of white-hot pain up her spine that made her vision blur. She stifled a scream, biting her lip until she tasted blood. She positioned herself directly over his abdomen. "Elias!" she gasped, sweat instantly beading on her forehead. "Look at the monitor. Do not look at me. Do not look at the door. You are my eyes." Okay. I'm the eyes," Elias whispered, his voice shaking. "I need you to call out the systolic pressure every 10 seconds. Can you do that?" Yes, I can." "Good." Finn placed her hands on Silas's stomach, just below the sternum. She found the anatomical landmark. She stacked her hands, interlocked her fingers, and straightened her elbows. She looked down at Silas's unconscious face. "Forgive me, boss. This is going to suck." She dropped her entire body weight down. Manual aortic compression. It was a brutal, archaic, and desperate maneuver. She was using her body weight to smash his abdominal aorta against his spine, physically pinching the hose shut to stop the blood from pouring into his belly. Under her hands, Silas's body jerked. Even in his coma, the pain was enough to reach him. A low, guttural groan escaped his lips. "Pressure!" Finn yelled. 60/40, Elias shouted, staring at the screen. "Pushing harder," Finn gritted out. She leaned forward, putting every ounce of her strength, every pound of her existence into her hands. Her broken leg was twisted beneath her, screaming in protest, throbbing in time with her own heartbeat. She felt like her femur was being split open with a chisel. "Focus," she told herself. "The pain is just noise. The mission is the man." "Pressure." 70/50, Elias called out, his voice gaining a fraction of confidence. "It's coming up." "Come on, Jack," Finn whispered, using his first name, the name only the ghosts used. "Stay in the fight. Don't you dare quit on me." Thump, thump. She could feel it. Beneath the layers of muscle and trauma, beneath her strangling grip, she felt the faint, bounding pulse of his aorta against her palms. She had the leak clamped. Suddenly, a fist slammed against the glass door. Finn didn't flinch, but Elias jumped nearly a foot in the air. Dr. Vane was on the other side of the glass. He had found them, and he looked like a man possessed. His face was twisted in a rictus of rage, his perfect hair disheveled. He pounded on the glass again, shouting something that was muffled by the soundproof seal, but the word was unmistakable on his lips. "Open!" He tried to slide the door. The crash cart held firm. Vane stepped back and kicked the door frame. He pointed a finger at Finn, his mouth forming the words, "You are finished." He sees us, Elias squeaked, terror returning to his eyes. He's going to kill me, my residency. It's over. Elias, Finn barked, not lifting her head, sweat dripping from her nose onto Silas's tactical vest. Eyes on the monitor! Vane doesn't matter. The politics don't matter. The only thing that matters is the number on that screen. Read it. Elias looked at Vane, then at Finn. He saw the sweat pouring down her face. He saw the agony etched into her features as she held the giant man alive by sheer will. He saw a woman who was breaking herself apart to save a stranger. Something in the boy changed. He squared his thin shoulders. He turned his back on the chief of surgery. 85/60, Elias shouted clearly. Heart rate stabilizing at 110. Finn let out a shuddering breath. Hold the line, Elias. Just hold the line. Outside, Vane had stopped banging. He was on his phone. He was calling security. He was calling the police. He was gesturing wildly to two burly uniformed guards coming down the hall. Finn watched them approach through the glass. She didn't move. She couldn't move. She was the anchor. If she let go, Silas died. They're coming in, Finn said calmly. Don't move, Elias. Don't let them touch the patient. I won't, the intern promised, though his knees were knocking together. The security guards reached the door. They looked at Vane, then at the blocked entrance. One of them produced a heavy baton and jammed it into the gap of the sliding door, preparing to pry it open. Finn pressed harder, her vision swimming with gray spots. The pain in her leg was no longer a sensation. It was a blinding white light that consumed her world. But under her hands, the pulse was strong. I'm here, Stone, she whispered into the chaos. I'm not going anywhere. The sound of metal shrieking against metal tore through the sterile silence of Trauma Bay 3. The security guards, two hulking men named Miller and Sanchez, had managed to pry the sliding door open just enough to get a shoulder in. With a synchronized grunt, they shoved. The heavy crash cart that Finn had used as a barricade skidded across the floor with a deafening screech. The door slammed open. Get her off him, Dr. Vane screamed, storming into the room like a vengeful spirit. She's assaulting a patient. Miller reached the gurney first. He didn't see a hero saving a life. He saw a frantic, disheveled nurse straddling a dying man, digging her fists into his stomach. He grabbed Finn by the shoulder of her scrub top. Ma'am, get down, now, Miller barked, yanking her backward. No, don't touch me, Finn shrieked, her voice raw. She locked her elbows, fighting the pull. If I let go, he bleeds out. His aorta is shredded. Pull her off, Vane commanded, pointing a trembling finger. She's delusional. Sanchez grabbed her other arm. Together, the two guards hauled her back with brutal efficiency. Finn's grip broke. As her hands were ripped away from Silas's abdomen, she felt the terrifying sudden release of pressure. The dam had burst. Vane! Finn screamed, twisting her body to look at the surgeon, her eyes wild. Abdominal distension is grade 4. Systolic dropped to 60 the second I let go. You have a pulsatile mass in the epigastrium. Put your hands on him, or he dies in 10 seconds. It was a gamble, a desperate, calculated gamble on the one thing Finn knew Vane possessed, his ego. Vane was a monster, but he was a surgeon. And a surgeon's instinct to fix a bleed was as involuntary as breathing. Vane looked at the monitor. The line was crashing. The red numbers were plummeting. 50, 30, 40, 20. The black tag in the hallway was one thing, a passive death. But a patient dying on a table under his direct observation, while a nurse screamed the exact diagnostic criteria at him, that was a failure. That was a lawsuit. That was a stain on his record. Damn it, Vane cursed. He lunged forward, not out of compassion, but out of reflex. He shoved Elias out of the way and jammed his hands into the exact spot Finn had just vacated. He felt it. The violent, bounding thrum of the ruptured vessel against the spine. The sheer volume of blood trying to escape was terrifying. OR! Vane roared, his face pale as he wrestled with the hydraulics of the human body. Get the prep team. I need an aortic clamp. We're opening him here. Move. Finn didn't see the rest. She was flying backward. Miller and Sanchez dragged her off the bed and threw her toward the door. She hit the linoleum floor hard. Crack. The sound came from inside her pant leg. The custom iron brace, already stressed to its limit by the earlier exertion, snapped a leather strap. The metal frame twisted violently, digging its serrated edge deep into her calf muscle. "Ah!" Finn gasped, curling into a ball as fresh, hot agony blinded her. Blood began to seep through the green fabric of her pants, dark and fast. "Stay down," Sanchez ordered, pinning her shoulder to the floor with his knee. "You're under arrest, lady." On the gurney, amidst the chaos of Vane shouting for instruments, Silas Stone stirred. The loss of Finn's touch, the sudden shift in pressure, or perhaps the sound of her cry, had pierced the veil of his coma. His hand, heavy and scarred, shot out blindly from the side of the bed. It grasped at the air, searching. His fingers brushed the hem of Finn's scrub pants as she was dragged away. He caught the fabric for a second, a weak, desperate anchor, before it slipped through his grasp. "Valkyrie!" The word was a rasp, barely audible over the noise of the crash cart being unpacked. But Finn heard it. It cut through the pain in her leg like a beacon. "I'm here!" Finn yelled from the floor, struggling against Sanchez's grip. "I'm here, Stone!" "Report!" Silas wheezed, his eyes fluttering open, glassy and unfocused, seeing a desert sky instead of a hospital ceiling. "Report! Position!" "Subject is secure," Finn shouted back, lapsing into the operational language that was their shared tongue. "Hemorrhage controlled. Medevac is on station. Stand down, Commander. Stand down." Silas's hand dropped. His chest heaved once, then settled into a rhythm as Vane successfully clamped the aorta. He drifted back into the dark, but the tension in his face had eased. He had heard her. He knew the watch was set. Vane, sweat dripping from his nose onto his mask, looked up from the open abdominal cavity. He had the bleed controlled. He had saved the life, technically. He handed the retractor to a terrified resident who had just run in. Then, he turned slowly to look at Finn. He walked over to where she was pinned on the floor. He looked down at her blood-stained pants, her wild hair, the way she was panting like a wounded animal. He didn't see a hero. He saw chaos. He saw a creature that had defied his absolute rule. "Get her out of here," Vane said, his voice dripping with ice. "Doctor, she's bleeding," Elias ventured from the corner, pointing at the pool of blood forming under Finn's leg. "I don't care if she's dying," Vane snapped. "She is no longer an employee of this hospital. She is a trespasser who just assaulted a physician and endangered a patient." He leaned down, bringing his face close to Finn's. "You are fired, Cross, effective immediately. And don't bother looking for another job. By the time I'm done with the police report, you'll be lucky if they let you mop floors in a prison." Finn stopped struggling. She looked up at him. Her face was pale, streaked with sweat and grime, but her eyes were dry. There was no fear in them anymore, only a deep, resonant pity. "You saved him," Finn whispered. "That's all that matters." "I saved him," Vane corrected, straightening his tie. "You just got in the way. Officers, remove her. Throw her out the front door. Let the press see what happens to rogue nurses at Metro Grace." Miller and Sanchez hauled her to her feet. Finn cried out as weight was put on her broken leg. The brace was useless now. It was just dead weight dragging behind her. She couldn't walk. She had to be carried, half dragged, her left foot trailing uselessly on the tile, leaving a smear of blood in her wake. They dragged her past the nurse's station. Kylie was there, holding a latte, watching with wide, gleeful eyes. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. "Told you she was crazy," Kylie whispered to a receptionist. They dragged her past the waiting room. The VIP in the suit was gone, whisked away to a private suite. But the hallway was still full of the forgotten, the poor, the sick, the homeless, and Artie. The old veteran was standing by the vending machine. He saw them dragging Finn. He saw the blood on her leg. He saw the way her head hung low, not in shame, but in exhaustion. He didn't say a word. He stood up straight. He brought his hand to his brow in a slow, trembling salute. Finn met his eyes. She managed a weak, lopsided smile. "Mission accomplished, soldier," her eyes said. Miller shoved the automatic doors open. The blast of winter air hit Finn like a physical slap. The storm was raging harder now. The snow was coming down in horizontal sheets. "Get out!" Miller grunted, shoving her forward. Finn stumbled. Her bad leg gave way instantly. She collapsed onto the frozen concrete of the ambulance bay driveway, landing hard on her hands and knees. The cold bit into her open wound immediately. "And stay out!" Sanchez yelled, tossing her coat, a thin, worn thing, onto the snow beside her. The doors hissed shut. The lock clicked. Finn was alone. She sat in the snow, the wind howling around her like a pack of wolves. She reached down and touched her leg. The metal was twisted into the flesh. She couldn't stand. She couldn't walk home. She was going to freeze to death in the parking lot of the hospital where she had worked for 5 years. She looked up at the sky. It was a swirling void of black and white. "Well," she whispered to the storm, her teeth chattering, "at least he's alive." She reached for her coat, her fingers numb. She started to pull it around her shoulders. Then she felt it. A vibration. It started low, a rumble in the pavement that she felt through her palms. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the generators. The water in a puddle near her hand began to ripple. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It grew louder, deeper, a mechanical roar that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Finn lifted her head. Through the blinding wall of white snow at the entrance of the hospital driveway, 2 lights appeared. They weren't headlights. They were searchlights, and they were aiming right at her. The cold was no longer painful. It had moved past agony into a strange, numbing weight that settled deep in Seraphina Cross's bones. She sat in the snow where the security guards had thrown her, her back pressed against the rough brick of the hospital's exterior wall. The blizzard had reduced the world to a few feet of visibility. Her breath plumed in weak gray clouds before being snatched away by the gale. Below her left knee, the snow was turning a dark, rusted red. The broken iron brace was still gnawing at her calf, but she couldn't feel it anymore. The nerve endings had frozen. She tried to pull her thin coat tighter, but her fingers were clumsy, unresponsive blocks of ice. She was 35 years old. She had survived mortar attacks in Syria, IEDs in Kandahar, and 5 years of silence in Detroit. And now she was going to die of hypothermia in a parking lot, 20 feet from a heated waiting room. "Just close your eyes," a voice in her head whispered. It sounded like Silas. "Rest, Valkyrie. The watch is over." "Not yet," she mumbled, her teeth clicking together uncontrollably. "Not yet." Inside the warm, brightly lit lobby of Metro Grace, the atmosphere was tense but normalized. The code black was technically ongoing, but the screaming had stopped. Dr. Vane had returned to the front desk, looking immaculate once more. He was berating the terrified receptionist about the coffee machine being offline due to the power fluctuations. "I don't care about the grid," Vane snapped, tapping his pen on the granite countertop. "I have just performed a complex aortic clamping. I require caffeine. Find a way." Next to him, Kylie was leaning against the counter, recounting the drama to a pair of wide-eyed medical students. "She went totally psycho," Kylie said, twirling a lock of hair. "Jumped on the patient like a feral cat. Dr. Vane had to literally wrestle her off. I always knew she was unstable." On the reception desk, next to Vane's hand, sat a plastic cup of water. It rippled. At first, it was subtle, concentric circles expanding from the center of the cup, distorting the fluorescent light reflected on the surface. Vane paused mid-sentence. He looked down at the cup. Ripple. Ripple. Then, the pen lying on the counter rattled. Click, click, click. "Is that—" The receptionist looked up, her face draining of color. "Is that the generator again?" "No," Vane frowned. The generator hummed. It didn't throb. This was different. This was a rhythmic, percussive pounding that seemed to be coming from the earth itself. Boom! 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 The floorboards beneath their feet began to vibrate. The sensation traveled up through the soles of their shoes, shaking their knees. The heavy glass sliding doors at the main entrance began to rattle in their frames, buzzing like trapped insects. "Earthquake?" one of the medical students squeaked, grabbing the counter for support. "In Michigan?" Vane scoffed, though he pulled his hand away from the shaking counter. "Don't be ridiculous. It's probably a snowplow hitting the building." But it wasn't a snowplow. The sound grew louder, transforming from a vibration into a roar. It was a mechanical, guttural growl that drowned out the wind outside. It sounded like a dinosaur dragging its belly across the asphalt. Dust began to fall from the suspended ceiling tiles. "What is that?" Kylie shouted over the noise, backing away from the windows. Outside, in the snow, Finn felt it before she heard it. The ground beneath her frozen legs jumped. The ice cracking on the pavement sounded like pistol shots. She forced her heavy eyelids open. Through the swirling curtain of white, two suns appeared. They were blindingly bright LED searchlights, cutting through the storm with a terrifying intensity. They were mounted high, too high for a truck, too high for a semi. The roar became deafening. The vehicle emerged from the whiteout like a leviathan breaching the surface of the ocean. It was a Stryker MEV, a medical evacuation vehicle. 8 massive run-flat tires, each the size of a man, churned the deep snow into gray slush. It was painted in flat, tactical gray, with no markings other than a black identification number stenciled on the reactive armor plating. It didn't slow down for the speed bumps. It crushed them. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, a second Stryker roared into view, its turret sweeping left and right. In the hospital driveway, a sleek black Mercedes-Benz S-Class was parked directly in the fire lane, hazard lights flashing. It was Dr. Vane's pride and joy, parked there because he refused to walk from the employee lot in the snow. The lead Stryker didn't honk. It didn't swerve. The driver didn't even tap the brakes. With a sickening crunch of metal and glass, the 20-ton armored beast rolled over the front hood of the Mercedes. The luxury car crumpled like an aluminum can. The Stryker's front tires climbed over the wreckage, crushing the engine block into the pavement, flattening the windshield, and grinding the chassis into scrap metal. Inside the lobby, Vane screamed, "My car! That's my car!" He ran toward the glass doors, but stopped short as the Stryker slammed to a halt just inches from the entrance awning. The sheer displacement of air from the vehicle's arrival blew the snow violently against the glass, coating the windows in a sheet of white. The second Stryker flanked the first, positioning itself to create a defensive perimeter. The vibration stopped, replaced by the idle thrum of massive diesel engines. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. "Call the police!" Vane shrieked, his face purple. "They just destroyed my car! Those maniacs!" "Doctor," the receptionist whispered, pointing a trembling hand. "Look!" On the roof of the lead Stryker, the hatch flew open. A soldier emerged. He was dressed in full winter combat gear, white camouflage over whites, a ballistic helmet with quad-tube panoramic night visions goggles flipped up, and a heavy parka. He gripped the handles of the common, remotely operated weapon station, Crows. The .50 caliber heavy machine gun mounted on the turret whirred to life. The barrel, thick and menacing, rotated slowly. It swept past the parking lot. It swept past the ambulance bay. It stopped, pointing directly at the hospital lobby. Vane stumbled back, tripping over his own feet. Kylie screamed and ducked behind the reception desk. The medical students hit the floor. "Don't shoot!" Vane whimpered, holding his hands up to the glass. But the gun didn't fire. Instead, the rear ramp of the lead Stryker hissed. Hydraulic pistons groaned as the heavy armored door lowered onto the snowy pavement with a heavy clang. Steam poured out of the troop compartment, mixing with the snow. From the mist, they emerged. 6 men. They moved with a fluidity that made them look like a single organism. They wore advanced combat helmets, plate carriers loaded with magazines, and winter gear that cost more than most of the cars in the parking lot. They carried short-barreled rifles suppressed and outfitted with laser designators. They didn't look like police. They didn't look like the National Guard. They looked like predators who had been let off the leash. They fanned out instantly, securing a 360-degree perimeter around the hospital entrance. Their movements were sharp, precise, and terrifyingly silent. The point man, a soldier with a skull balaclava covering the lower half of his face, raised a gloved fist. The team froze. He tapped his headset. "Perimeter secure!" His voice boomed through an external speaker system on the Stryker, loud enough to be heard inside the lobby. "Breaching team, move!" Vane watched in horror as 2 of the soldiers marched directly toward the sliding glass doors. They didn't wait for them to open. One of them simply kicked the sensor, and the doors jerked open. The freezing wind rushed into the lobby again, but but no one complained about the cold. They were too busy staring at the heavily armed men invading their workplace. The soldiers ignored the reception desk. They ignored the screaming nurses. They ignored Dr. Vane cowering by the overturned plant pot. They turned right, heading straight for the exterior wall of the ambulance bay. Outside, Finn watched the boots crunching through the snow toward her. Her vision was tunneling. The black spots were taking over. She tried to lift her head, to see who had come, but her neck muscles refused to cooperate. "Friendly or hostile?" her training asked. "Does it matter?" Her exhaustion answered. "I'm so cold." A shadow fell over her. A figure knelt in the snow beside her. She felt a hand, warm, gloved, and incredibly gentle, touch her cheek. "Valkyrie?" a voice asked. It was distorted by a radio, but she knew the cadence. Finn forced one eye open. She saw the white camouflage. She saw the patch on the shoulder. The ghost. "Late," she whispered, her lips blue. "You're late." "Traffic was a bitch," the soldier replied. He turned his head, shouting into his comms. "I have the package, south side of the ER entrance. Condition critical. Hypothermia and active bleed from the lower extremity. Get the litter, now." He unclipped his cloak and wrapped it around her. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. "Stay with me, Chief," the soldier said, checking her pulse. "The cavalry is here." Finn let her head fall back against the brick wall. Through the swirling snow, she saw the silhouette of the Strykers' gun turret guarding her, a steel dragon breathing smoke into the winter night. For the first time in 5 years, Seraphina Cross allowed herself to close her eyes. The lobby of Metro Grace Hospital had ceased to be a place of healing. It was now a forward operating base. The transformation had been absolute and terrifyingly swift. 6 operators from the Ghost Unit held the perimeter, their weapons at the low ready, their eyes scanning the terrified medical staff with the detached scrutiny of wolves watching a herd of sheep. The wind from the open doors swirled snow across the polished granite floors, mixing with the debris from Dr. Vane's crushed Mercedes, but no one dared to move to close them. Dr. Julian Vane stood by the reception desk, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He smoothed the front of his white coat, his mind racing to salvage the situation. His car was a pancake. His ER was under martial law. But he was Julian Vane. He was the chief of trauma. He had just clamped the aorta of a massive soldier. Surely this display of force was for him. They were here to secure the VIP he had saved. "It's a protective detail," Vane whispered to Kylie, who was crouching behind a potted fern, clutching her phone. "They're here for the commander, and I'm the one who kept him alive." Confidence, fueled by narcissism, began to trickle back into his veins. He stood up straighter. He adjusted his tie. He prepared his hero face. From the swirling mist of the open doorway, a new figure emerged. He was different from the others. He wasn't carrying a rifle. He wore a sidearm strapped to his chest rig and a radio handset clipped to his shoulder. He walked with a heavy, predatory grace, his boots crunching loudly on the broken glass and snow that littered the entryway. This was Lieutenant Kalen Riker, call sign Ghost. He was a terrifying man to behold. He removed his helmet as he entered the light, revealing a face that was a roadmap of violence. A thick, ropey scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline, pulling his lip into a permanent slight snarl. His hair was cropped close, silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of gunmetal, cold, hard, and utterly devoid of mercy. Vane saw his moment. He stepped forward, clearing his throat loudly. "Officer! Or General!" Vane projected his voice, putting on his most authoritative tone. He walked toward Riker, extending a manicured hand. "I am Dr. Julian Vane, the chief of surgery here. I assume you are here for the patient I just operated on." The lobby went deathly silent. The other soldiers didn't even turn their heads, but the air seemed to tighten. Vane continued, emboldened by the silence. "It was touch and go, I won't lie. His aorta was compromised, but I managed to clamp it. I saved your man. I assume you'll want to debrief me on the security protocols for his recovery." Ghost didn't stop walking. He didn't look at Vane. He didn't look at Vane's extended hand. He walked through the space Vane was occupying, forcing the doctor to stumble backward to avoid being trampled. It wasn't an insult. It was something worse. It was total erasure. To Ghost, Dr. Julian Vane was less significant than the snow melting on his boots. Vane stood there, hands still extended, blinking in confusion. "Excuse me! I am talking to you. I am the reason your commander is alive." Ghost stopped. He turned his head slowly, looking at Vane for the first time. The look lasted less than a second, but it carried enough contempt to wither a sequoia. "You?" Ghost's voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "You're just the mechanic, Doc. You didn't save him." Ghost turned away, dismissing Vane entirely. His eyes scanned the room, ignoring the terrified nurses and the cowering students. He was looking for something precious. "Bring her in," Ghost ordered into his headset. Two soldiers entered from the storm. Between them, carried in a chair formed by their interlocked arms, sat Seraphina Finn Cross. She looked small, wrapped in the oversized white tactical cloak, shivering violently, her face pale as death. Her leg, the pants torn and blood-soaked, dangled limply. She looked broken. Kylie, peeking out from behind the fern, let out a small, incredulous scoff. "They brought the turtle back inside? Why?" Ghost walked toward Finn. The terrifying aura of violence that surrounded him seemed to evaporate the moment he got within 5 feet of her. He signaled to his men. "Set her down," Ghost said softly. "Easy. Watch the leg." The soldiers lowered Finn gently onto one of the waiting room chairs. She slumped back, exhausted, her eyes half open. "Riker," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "You got old." "And you got hard to find," Riker replied. Then the unthinkable happened. The terrifying lieutenant, the man who had ignored the chief of surgery, took a step back. He unclipped his primary weapon and let it hang on its sling. He dropped to one knee. It wasn't a tactical crouch. It was a kneel, a genuflection. He lowered his head, placing his fist on the floor, bowing before the shivering, bloodied nurse in the dirty scrubs. Behind him, the 5 other operators in the lobby, men who looked like they ate barbed wire for breakfast, simultaneously dropped to one knee. The sound of 12 heavy combat boots hitting the floor and 6 armored knees striking the granite echoed like a gunshot. Dr. Vane's jaw dropped. The receptionist covered her mouth. Artie, standing by the vending machine, straightened his spine and held his salute, tears streaming down his grimy face. "Target acquired," Ghost said, his voice thick with emotion, booming through the silent lobby. "Seraphina Cross, call sign, Valkyrie." Vane stepped forward, his confusion overriding his fear. "Valkyrie? What are you talking about? That's just Cross. She's a nurse, a fired nurse." Ghost stood up slowly. He turned to face Vane. This time, the Predator was fully present. He walked toward the doctor until he was inches from his face. Vane could smell the ozone and gun oil on him. "Just a nurse?" Ghost repeated, the words dripping with dangerous quiet. He turned to the room, raising his voice so every soul in the building could hear. 5 years ago, during Operation Sandstorm in the Syrian al-Badiah region, a Spec Ops team was pinned down by a battalion of insurgents. We were cut off, no air support, no extraction. We were taking heavy casualties. Ghost pointed at Finn, who was trying to sit up straighter, clutching the cloak. "Our medic was killed in the first volley. We had no way to treat the wounded. Then, a naval corpsman attached to the support unit volunteered to run the gauntlet. She crossed 300 yards of open desert under mortar fire to get to us." Vane looked at Finn. He tried to reconcile the image of the turtle with the story being told. "Impossible," he muttered. "She can't even run." "She dragged 4 men to safety that night," Ghost continued, his voice rising. "She kept pressure on a jugular vein for 6 hours while the building shook around her. And when the extraction chopper finally came, there wasn't enough room. One person had to stay behind to cover the retreat." Ghost paused. He looked at Finn with a reverence that bordered on worship. "She didn't draw the short straw. She volunteered. She stayed behind with a saw machine gun so my team could lift off." A gasp went through the lobby. Kylie's phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. "We thought she was dead," Ghost said. "We watched the position get overrun, but she didn't die. She fought, and when she ran out of ammo, she used her body to shield Commander Stone from a grenade blast." Ghost pointed to Finn's shattered leg. "That limp you all laugh at?" Ghost snarled, looking directly at Kylie, then at Vane. That isn't a disability. That is the receipt for 40 lives saved. That is the price of my life, of Commander Stone's life, of every man standing in this room. He turned back to Vane. She took the shrapnel so we could go home to our families. She spent 18 months in rehab, learning to stand up again. And you... Ghost poked a hard finger into Vane's chest, pushing the doctor back. You made her carry oxygen tanks? You made her fetch coffee? You threw her out in the snow? Vane was trembling now, his face the color of ash. I didn't know. Her file, it just said medical discharge. It didn't say... It's redacted, Ghost spat. Because heroes like her don't do it for the fame, Doctor. They do it because they are the sheepdogs who keep the wolves away from sheep like you. Finn let out a soft cough. Riker, she rasped. Stand down. You're scaring the civilians. Ghost turned back to her instantly, his face softening. They need to know, Finn. We looked for you. For 5 years. We thought you wanted to be lost. I was broken, Caitlin, Finn whispered. A broken medic is no use to the team. A Valkyrie doesn't break, Ghost said, kneeling beside her again to check her leg. He saw the blood soaking the bandage. His eyes darkened. You're bleeding. We need to move. We have a sterile trauma bay, Vane stammered, trying to be useful, trying to claw back some shred of dignity. Bay 3. I can prep it myself. Don't you come near her, Ghost said, cutting him off without looking up. You've done enough damage. He tapped his headset. Bring the Stryker around to the main doors. Prepare the mobile surgical suite. We are transporting Valkyrie to the tarmac. Halo 1 is inbound for extraction to Walter Reed. Walter Reed? Vane gaped. But she's just a civilian employee. Ghost stood up and looked Vane in the eye one last time. She is a recipient of the Navy Cross and the Silver Star, Doctor. She outranks you. She outranks everyone in this city. And as of 0300 hours, she has been reactivated. Ghost gestured to his men. 2 of them moved forward to lift Finn's chair. As they lifted her, Finn looked across the lobby. She saw Kylie, who was crying silently, her hand over her mouth. She saw the students looking at her, not with pity, but with awe. And she saw Dr. Vane, a small, petty man in a white coat, crumbling under the weight of the truth. Finn didn't gloat. She just looked tired. Dr. Vane, she said softly. Vane looked up, startled. Check the boy in Bay 2, Finn said. His pressure might drop again when the labetalol wears off. Don't rely on the machines. Watch the patient. Vane stared at her. After everything, the insults, the abuse, the firing, she was still thinking about the patient. It was a final, crushing blow to his ego. It proved that she was the healer he pretended to be. Vane nodded, unable to speak. Move out, Ghost commanded. The unit began to move, forming a protective phalanx around Seraphina Cross, the woman who had limped in the shadows for 5 years, now carried into the light by the legends she had saved. The transition from the stale, panicked air of Metro Grace Hospital to the interior of the Stryker medical evacuation vehicle was like stepping from the 19th century into the 21st. 2 operators lifted Seraphina Finn Cross through the rear hydraulic ramp, moving her with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The inside of the armored beast was a cavern of humming technology. Unlike the hospital, which was currently flickering on dying backup generators, the Stryker was alive with steady, piercing white LED lighting. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying biometrics in high definition. The air smelled of ozone, sterile packaging, and the reassuring heavy scent of diesel. In the center of the module, secured to a specialized shock-absorbing trauma rack, lay Commander Silas Iron Stone. He was no longer the discarded black tag left to die in a hallway. He was the center of a universe of care. A flight medic, a young woman with intense eyes and steady hands, was already adjusting a portable ventilator, though Silas was fighting it, his chest rising and falling with a strength that defied his injuries. "Valkyrie on deck!" Ghost announced, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. Silas turned his head. It was a small movement, costing him visible effort, but his eyes locked onto Finn instantly. Through the haze of morphine and blood loss, the iron in his gaze had returned. He reached out a hand, his left, the one not splinted, and patted the empty trauma rack next to him. "Secure her," Silas rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. Right next to me. Belay that, Finn said softly, though her voice carried a newfound strength. I'm not a patient, Commander. I'm a medic. You're bleeding, Chief, Ghost said gently, nodding to her leg where the blood had soaked through the temporary field dressing. Sit down, that's an order. Finn hesitated, then nodded. She allowed them to settle her onto the adjacent rack. As she sat, the adrenaline that had fueled her for the last hour began to recede, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. But it was a good exhaustion. It was the tired of a mission accomplished, not the tired of a soul suppressed. We are green for departure, the driver's voice crackled over the intercom. ETA to Selfridge Air National Guard Base is 20 mics. The bird is spinning up. Hold, Finn said suddenly. She twisted in her seat, looking back out the open ramp. The snow was swirling violently in the backwash of the massive engines, creating a vortex of white. Through the haze, she could see the hospital entrance. The staff was huddled behind the glass doors, watching. But one figure had braved the cold. Artie. The old homeless veteran had shuffled out onto the sidewalk, ignoring the biting wind. He stood near the crushed wreckage of Dr. Vane's Mercedes, his thin, mismatched coat fluttering wildly. He wasn't cowering. He was standing at attention, his hand raised in a salute that was as crisp as the day he had graduated boot camp decades ago. Ghost, Finn said. 1 minute. We're burning daylight, Valkyrie, Ghost warned, checking his watch. I said 1 minute. Finn reached into the cardboard box of personal effects that Ghost's men had retrieved for her, the meager sum of her 5 years at Metro Grace. She dug past her stethoscope, past the coffee mug, and pulled out an object wrapped in plastic. It was her old field jacket, olive drab, faded by the desert sun, with the Ghost unit patch still faintly visible on the shoulder. She had kept it hidden in her locker, a relic of a life she thought was over. Help me up, Finn commanded. Finn, your leg. Help me up. Ghost sighed, a sound that was half annoyance and half admiration. He stepped forward and offered her his arm. Finn gripped it, pulling herself upright. The pain in her calf was a distant shriek, irrelevant compared to what she had to do. She hopped on her good leg to the edge of the ramp. The wind whipped her hair across her face. Artie! She screamed over the roar of the engines. The old man blinked, lowering his hand. Finn threw the jacket. It caught the wind, tumbling through the snowy air like a darker bird, before landing at Artie's feet. It's wool-lined, Finn shouted. Keep your perimeter secure, Sergeant. Artie picked up the jacket. He clutched it to his chest, burying his face in the fabric that smelled of history and honor. He looked up at her, tears freezing on his cheeks, and nodded once, a solemn pact between warriors. Let's go. Finn turned back to Ghost. But before the hydraulic ramp could hiss shut, a frantic figure burst through the hospital doors. Dr. Julian Vane ran into the snow. He was not wearing a coat. His white lab coat was flapping open, revealing his expensive shirt instantly soaking with wet snow. He slipped on the ice, caught himself on the bumper of the Stryker, and scrambled toward the ramp. Wait! Stop! Vane shrieked, his voice shrill with panic and indignation. Ghost put a hand on his sidearm, stepping between Finn and the doctor. Back away, civilian. She can't leave! Vane yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Finn. There is protocol. There is paperwork. She has a disciplinary file. She assaulted a staff member. She can't just leave with the military. Vane was hyperventilating. It wasn't about the protocol. It wasn't about the law. It was about the terrifying realization that his world, the small kingdom where he was God, was being dismantled. The turtle was leaving, and she was leaving as a queen, while he was left shivering in the ruins of his ego. You are kidnapping a suspended employee, Vane spat, his teeth chattering. I will call the medical board. I will have your badges. Finn placed a hand on Ghost's shoulder, signaling him to stand down. She limped to the edge of the ramp one last time. She looked down at Dr. Vane. From this height, standing on the armor of a combat vehicle, flanked by the deadliest men on the planet, she looked 10 feet tall. The wind blew her hair back, revealing the sharp, angular lines of her face, the face of a woman who had stared down death more times than Vane had stared into a mirror. Dr. Vane, Finn said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a timbre that cut through the storm. Vane looked up, shivering uncontrollably. You are making a mistake, Cross. No, Finn corrected him. The mistake was yours. You thought that because I limped, I was weak. You thought that because I was quiet, I was empty. She leaned down slightly, her blue eyes piercing him. You learned to save lives in a heated classroom, Doctor. You learned from textbooks and multiple-choice exams. You learned to worry about lawsuits and billing codes. Finn gestured to the bloody interior of the Stryker, to Silas, to the scars on Ghost's face, and finally to her own broken leg. I learned to save lives in the mud, she whispered, the words heavy with the weight of memory. I learned to bargain with the Reaper while bleeding out in a ditch. I learned that a license doesn't make you a healer. Courage does. Vane opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at the massive machine, at the soldiers, and finally at the woman he had tormented for years. He realized, with a crushing finality, that he was the smallest thing in the storm. Do not, Finn said, her voice turning to steel, ever judge a wolf by the sheepskin she wears to survive. Because when the winter comes, Doctor, the sheep freeze. But the wolves come home. She straightened up. She didn't look back at him. She looked at Ghost. Close it. Ghost hit the button. The hydraulics hissed. The heavy armored door began to rise, shutting out the blizzard, the hospital, and the small, shivering man standing in the snow. The last thing Dr. Vane saw was Seraphina Cross turning her back on him, limping toward the commander who had refused to die, as the warm light of the Stryker swallowed her whole. Clang! The ramp locked, the seal engaged. Dr. Vane stood alone in the dark. His car was a pancake. His authority was shattered. The cold cerned to seep into his very soul. He wrapped his thin arms around himself, shivering violently, as the massive engines of the Strykers revved. With a roar that shook the remaining glass in the hospital windows, the convoy lurched forward. The massive tires churned the snow, throwing slush onto Vane's pristine white coat. He watched them go, two gray ghosts disappearing into the whiteout, taking the legend of the Valkyrie with them. Inside the vehicle, the noise of the outside world faded to a dull hum. Finn sat back on the rack. The flight medic immediately moved in, cutting away her pant leg to dress the wound properly. Finn didn't flinch. She looked across the narrow aisle. Silas was watching her. His face was pale, but he was smiling. A weak, jagged thing, but a smile nonetheless. You kept me waiting, Valkyrie, Silas whispered. Finn reached out and took his hand. His grip was weak, but it was there. Traffic was a bitch, sir, she repeated the code, smiling as tears finally, freely, began to roll down her cheeks. Where to? Ghost asked from the front, looking back at them with a grin. Finn looked at her hand interlaced with Silas's. She looked at the ghost patch on her shoulder. She looked at the iron brace that had broken, knowing that Walter Reed would build her a better one, a stronger one. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of diesel and brotherhood. The suffocation of the last 5 years was gone. The cage was open. Home, Finn said. Take us home. Ladies and gentlemen, the legend of Seraphina Cross teaches us a profound lesson that we can carry into our daily lives. We live in a world that is obsessed with appearances. We judge the book by its cover, the doctor by his coat, and the nurse by her limp. But this story reminds us that true value is often hidden. The person you overlook in the grocery store, or the quiet coworker you ignore, might be carrying a history of bravery and sacrifice that would bring you to your knees. True strength is not found in titles, status, or a perfect exterior. It is found in the quiet resolve to keep serving, to keep loving, and to keep fighting even when the world tells you that you are broken. Be kind to everyone you meet, for you never know when you are standing in the presence of a hidden lion. If Finn's journey from the freezing shadows back to the warmth of her team touched your heart, please hit the like button. It truly helps us share these powerful stories with more people. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And let me know in the comments. Do you think Dr. Vane deserved a harsher punishment? Or was being left behind in the cold enough? Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of our journey together. Now, I would like to say a short prayer for you and your family. May God grant you the resilience of a warrior when the storms of life surround you. May he heal the wounds that no one else can see and give you the courage to stand tall when you feel like falling. May he surround you with people who see your true worth, and may you always find your way home. If you receive this blessing and believe in your own inner strength, please write Amen in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and never underestimate the quiet ones.